Can you hear me better now? Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, put the first slide up, please. You can see it here. So, to begin the story, infections are the number 3 cause of death in the United States. They're the number 2 cause of death in the world. Close to 15 million deaths in 2004, close to 30% of all deaths. Hospital-acquired infections in the United States, over 2 billion per year. At least, according to the Centers for Disease Control in the United States, at least 23,000 deaths a year due to antimicrobial resistant bacterial infections. This is very worrisome. So to talk about bacteria, many bacteria live in the bodies of people and animals, often without crossing harm. Only a few kinds of bacteria cause disease. Sometimes bacteria that normally reside harmlessly in the body are able to cause disease. And they do this by reducing harmful substances, toxins, they invade, and sometimes our own immune reaction is so strong that the immune reaction that we provide causes significant damage to our own body. We call that sepsis and septic shock. And the problem that I'm having is that there are nice figures that go along with these that are not showing up. The words are all showing up, the figures that go along with the words are not pointing to us on the screen. I don't know why. That's just what we want. Because without the pictures, it's hard to tell a good story. Bacteria come in many different shapes and sizes. And this was a key point that I was going to try to make. That the bacteria that live in our bodies, you can see, the gram-positives, the gram-negatives, those circles that we call outside, the longer ones that are spiral in nature, the rods, and they all live together generally peacefully in our body. We call that the microbiome. That's not really next slide. Here we are. Okay, so bacteria and other higher organisms are different. They're very similar. So bacteria we call prokaryotic. They were the original life forms. Humans are eukaryotic. Mammalians are eukaryotic, and there's a big difference in the way the cells operate. DNA, RNA replication, protein synthesis, and energy production are pretty similar types. Bacteria do not have a cell nucleus. Their DNA is not enclosed in the nucleus as it is. And the other big difference is that in bacteria, Almost all of the pathogenic bacteria have a wall around the outside that protects them called a peptide ligand. Anybody have a pointer? Okay, all right. You just have to imagine so the bacteria, the top one is the bacteria. The outer wall is active ligand. And one of the key principles that was first described almost 150 years ago by Paul Ehrlich, the founder of the modern chemotherapy, was defined as silver bullet. The concept of the silver bullet was to come up with substances that were able to attack bacteria targets that don't also occur in humans. So this is why penicillin became the very first, very best antibiotic ever discovered and developed because it targets the peptide ligand of the bacteria. Humans don't have peptide ligand, so there's no cross-toxicity. The problems that we get from penicillin are not related to on-target cross-reactive effects, but rather due to allergy that we have to penicillin. Unfortunately, that's not so common, but we have to know about it because sometimes the allergies to penicillin can be lethal. So in 1884, almost 150 years ago, Hans Christian Braun published a method to stain bacteria and showed some of the stain in a positive way that would be dark blue and others did not. That would be red. So we call it first positive and the others negative. These became known as gram-positive and gram-negative. What's the difference between gram-positive and gram-negative? Shown on the top of gram-positive bacteria, these have thick peptide ligands. And underneath is the membrane that also has. And the gram-negative, the one below, the peptide ligand, I think you can see, is much thinner than it is in the gram-positive. But more importantly, there's another membrane on the outside of the peptide ligand in gram-negatives. That's called the outer membrane. And for that reason, many antibiotics that are trying to attack the peptide ligand, like penicillin, don't work very well in gram-negatives because they have to go through that outer membrane. The other thing that gram-negatives have that are present in some gram-positives, but not to the same extent and degree. You see those blue circles, they're meant to represent channels. And those channels act as pumps to pump out materials that get into the bacteria cell. These are called efflux pumps. And if you think about it, most of the gram-negatives also live in the sewer systems, the water supplies, with a lot of noxious substances, lead, cadmium, arsenic, other heavy metals. The bacteria have evolved to be able to get rid of those noxious materials through these efflux pumps. Guess what? These efflux pumps are also used by the bacteria to efflux antibiotics. And for gram-negatives, a very important cause of resistance to many of the antibiotics we use is the development and focusing of these efflux pumps and getting rid of the antibiotics. As soon as they come in, they get effluxed out. So as you can see, the bacteria are very clever, and because they multiply every 20 minutes, at least in my family, the best we can do is about every 20 years. 20 minutes versus 20 years. There are so many more bacteria than there are humans. If you think about it, they really have an edge, which led to the late Nobel laureate Joshua Lederberg to make the comment, it's our wits against their genes in terms of dealing with the resistance problem. The other thing is that you are actually, from the standpoint of the cells in your body, you're 90% bacteria. Did you know that? So another way to think about that, we're all walking suitcases. On the outside, the bacteria being what's mostly in the suitcases. 90%. There are 10 times more bacterial cells than human cells than the average person. The human microbiome, so this big, large amount of bacteria, most of them not all, many of them are in the gastrointestinal tract, many of them in the upper respiratory tract, they're on the skin, they're in the urogenital systems. These represent different ecological niches. But because the microbiome, as we call it now, has been recognized as so important to human health, to the ability to metabolize nutrients, to the ability to generate an immune response, to provide signals to our immune system, there's been a major funding from the National Institutes of Health in the United States and other places to actually try to study the microbiome in better ways. There's also up to 10,000 different species of bacteria in a person, amounting to 300 times the number of bacterial genes that we carry around in our body than we have human genes. Think about that for a minute. So, the interaction between bacteria and humans is getting to be more and more important as we recognize it, which raises another very important issue, and that is that it used to be, we used to think that most of the detrimental effects of giving antibiotics, aside from allergies and side effects, was the selection of resistance in the body against that pneumonia. But now we're realizing that an equally bad problem with giving antibiotics, maybe even worse than the selection of resistance, is disturbing that normal microbiome. It's been shown that if you take an antibiotic even for 4 or 5 days for sinusitis, laryngitis, you perturb the microbiome for as long as 4 to 6 months. You affect, you disturb what's in your body. And one of the consequences of disturbing the microbiome has been the emergence of a very bad disease. The Centers for Disease Control in the United States calls it deadly diarrhea. This is gastroenteritis due to Clostridium difficile, which is a gram-negative organism. It's an anaerobic gram-negative that normally doesn't cause too much trouble, but when you take an antibiotic that gets rid of some of the old bacteria that reside in the gastrointestinal tract, these bacteria are able to overgrow and take over, and you produce a toxin that can be very bad and actually lethal. And this is another reason that we need to be much more careful in the way we use our antibiotics. As I mentioned, bacteria can cause serious problems when they get out of their niche. We did an excellent talk just preceding about the effect of influenza allowing the pneumococcus and also Staphylococcus to be able to penetrate. Many of us are colonized right now by both of those organisms. They don't typically cause trouble. But if you get a viral infection, we break down the barriers and then those organisms can invade. And this is true in various other parts of the body as well. And the types of infections are just shown graphically here. You can see essentially every part of the human body can be affected by this. And I think it's important to note, if you look at down there, you see the catheter coming out. The catheter. That's meant to point out that the big problem that we have is hospital-related infections, very often involving foreign bodies that are put into people. Those foreign bodies are able to become colonized with pathogenic organisms to develop a biofilm, and then the bacteria are able to invade through the catheter tract. Part of the problem there is that our immune system, our white cells, are not able to artificial hip. That's a hip replacement. That's another foreign body that is much more amenable to becoming colonized and getting infected by bacteria, either that were put in place at the time of surgery, that's typically staph epidermis, often a not very important pathogen, one that lives in our skin all the time, but they can get in our bloodstream, usually causes no trouble, but if you've got a foreign body like that, it will stick to the foreign body and cause disease. Eventually, the only way to cure it is to have that foreign body removed. That's a very good problem. Somebody answer the phone, please? Answer the phone? Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of this in great detail. These are the sorts of infections that are particularly bad in hospitalized patients. I'll just read the general points and we can talk more about this in the Q&A later. Bacteremia, endocarditis, complicated skin and structure infections, complicated intra-abdominal infections, complicated urinary tract infections, and hospital-associated and ventilator-associated pneumonia. These are often diseases that end up killing the patient. It's very problematic in terms of being able to treat and otherwise debilitate patients already in the hospital, and then they get one of these infections. And we realize now that we didn't so much 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when I first started my practice of medicine, that the treatment of infections due to the more benign, typically respiratory tract infections, like pharyngitis, like sinusitis, like ear infection. The use of antibiotics in many of these situations is probably not appropriate and not indicated, because most of these disease viruses anyway, most of these resolve. In contrast, these diseases I'm showing you are usually real case. These are the ones that absolutely need antibiotics. Impressively, at least in the United States, probably 30 to 50% of all antibiotic use is now viewed as inappropriate. Inappropriate because it's being used actually to treat viral infections and not these serious bacterial infections. And the consequence of inappropriate use is that you both select for resistance and you perturb the microbiome. Those are the two bad things that happen when we use antibiotics in the So let's talk about resistance for the rest of the talk. Just to begin with, natural mutations, evolutionary processes like gene transfer, allow bacteria to adapt to the environment. So at the very top, these are pneumococci, and you'll see one of them has this gene, a little red gene, just below it, that leads to penicillin resistance. And normally, that organism, that gene, will be in the minority. Very often, a gene like that may actually make that organism not grow as fast. It has a problem competing with its neighbors. But anybody penicillin into this, and look what happens. You kill all the penicillin-sensitive bacteria, and you end up with at the bottom a pure population of penicillin-resistant strains. So this is what happens when we use antibiotics in nature. And then the way that these genes get transferred, the first is bacterial transformation, which will make DNA leaves one bacteria and is transferred to another. That's typically for a single gene that make it across. The second is called transduction. That's when viruses that affect bacteria called bacteriophage land on bacteria and pull up, suck up the gene, and land on another one, and inject that gene into the bacteria. But the one that's most serious is the one at the bottom, bacterial conjugation. You see that little circle next to the chromosome? That circle is a much smaller unit of DNA called the plasmid. That unit of DNA can replicate on its own. It doesn't need the chromosome to replicate. And what these plasmids have, very often, are an array of different genes is that the resistance factor for felicity, which is viewed as the last available antitoxin, but it's the last available antibiotic for many of those resistant bacteria, that resistance gene has now been formulated from the plasma. And now that gene is shown to transfer. And the transfer doesn't have to be bacteria are very promiscuous in the way they interact with other bacteria. They don't. One species is not related to another species. You can have one species mating, if you will, with a completely different species. And their plasma can transfer from an E. coli to a Klebsiella to a Pseudomonas to an SC to a Rhinovirus. And so we're starting to see an explosion of resistance because these bacteria are able to use the conjugation principle. Now, I hope you can read this. It's meant to show on the top the year that antibiotics are introduced. And below is this is a graphic of years starting from 1940 and all the way to 2010, 2011 across. And the point is that within a fairly short period of time, from the introduction of the antibiotic, we were actually able to see resistance in hospitals and patients. A very interesting case, if you look at penicillin, penicillin was first delivered in 1942. There was evidence of resistance in bacteria that was seen as early as 1940. And in fact, there have been studies that have gone to places like Borneo, which has never seen antibiotics, communities, caves, where they've never antibiotics have been used clinically, and bacteria have been extracted from resistance to antibiotics that we found. That's not so strange to consider because antibiotics come from, most of them, natural sources. So the bacteria have been interacting with other bacteria and fungi that have been making antibiotics for literally millions of years. And they've been able to evolve. The difference is with the enormous use of these antibiotics, the selective pressure is gone up exponentially. So some key points. Resistance evolves at different rates. Several groups of antibiotics were used for many years before resistance was seen. Resistance to penicillin was seen actually in the clinic about a few years later, but semi-synthetic forms of penicillin and ampicillin had a much longer period of time before resistance developed. Others, methicillin, lasted only a single year. And that's part of the reason for the epidemic of MRSA, methicillin resistant staphylococcus. And the length of the interval before resistance appears, is inversely proportional to increasing. So the more you use it, the more you lose it. The more you use it, the more you lose it. So this creates a very big issue for medical practitioners. Some of you out there, I know, take care of patients. You have a sick individual. You need to treat them. And we know that the longer you wait in treating somebody, particularly who's septic, every hour that goes by, the mortality goes up. You have to start using antibiotics right away. On the other hand, if the antibiotic is either inappropriate, sometimes we don't know what the organism is, we use the wrong antibiotic. Or it's broader spectrum than you need, and you actually get a much more narrow spectrum antibiotic. You have the opportunity to make the problem worse for the community by constant selection of immune resistance. So this is a very difficult issue that we're dealing with. I believe, and many of my colleagues in our studies agree, that one of the ways around that problem is to get much better rapid diagnostics. Diagnostics you can get at the bedside to tell several things. Number one, does this patient actually have a bacterial infection? Or is it a virus? Is it influenza? If it's influenza, you don't want to use it. They may have a fever, but they don't need to. Number two, if it is a bacterial infection, what is the bacteria? And number three, what is the resistance pattern of the bacteria? bacteria so I can pick the exact right antibiotic I need to have for that patient. Right now, it takes typically 2 days to get the culture, identification of the organism, and susceptibility within 2 full days where you don't know whether you're using the right antibiotic. Think about how much better it would be for society in general if we could know within an hour or two what the problem is. There are a number of companies that are working on this, and I think this could be a major breakthrough in the way we treat patients. But now more sober information. This is a study that was commissioned by former Prime Minister Cameron of Great Britain. He was kicked out because the Brexit voters were made. And Jim O'Neill was an expert that he brought in to help work on the question, what is it going to look like in 2050 at the present rate of antibiotic resistance growth? Well, presently, you see the blue, the light blue, antibiotic resistance now is estimated to cause about 700,000 deaths per year worldwide. By the year 2050, it's estimated to balloon to 10 million. And to put that in perspective, cancer kills about 8 million people a year. Diabetes kills about 1.5 million people a year. Those aren't going to get worse. But resistance and deaths due to resistance are going to explode. Because he's an economist, he also made a prediction that the cost of this, in addition to lives, is going to be in aggregate from today to 2050, $100 trillion United States dollars. $100 trillion United States dollars. That's staggering. And no walls can prevent that. Another. I'm sorry. The other issue is, if you look around the world, you can, according to the UN reports, the big problems are mostly in Africa and Asia. Africa and Asian resistance. They're not in North America, they're not in Latin America, they're not in other parts of Europe. And a big part of the problem in Africa and Asia is, we talk about the issue of antimicrobial stewardship and misuse, but a very bigger problem is that the sanitation is so bad, that poverty is so great. Poverty is so great that I have a colleague who lives in India as well as in the United States, and said 90% of the population are so poor they can't even afford to see a physician. And the water supply is contaminated. And in a recent presentation at the Infectious Disease Society in New Orleans 2 weeks ago, his colleague gave a presentation that said that if you go to India and spend 6 days, on average 6 days or longer in India, you have over an 85% chance of coming home with an ESBL producing bacteria. That's very bad resistant bacteria that resides in our intestines. And the other point about that is, it doesn't go away. It lives in your body for the next 6 months to a year. And therefore, you are much more likely to develop an infection due to that organism because it's going to resist the typical antibiotics that you otherwise put together. So this is a worldwide problem. This is why we need to get religious, because we're all connected first. One new antibiotics. The United States Surgeon General very arrogantly and stupidly said, we cannot close the books on infectious disease because at that time we stopped. There will be antibiotics that we needed to already discovered and done it. We don't need it anymore. And look what happens just a few years later. Blue rice, colleague of mine, journalist at Brown University in New York Times. There are strains out there becoming more and more common. They're resistant to virtually every antibiotic. And in a survey organism the patient is dying of is resistant to everything. Very worse. What are the bad bugs? Sometimes these are called the escape pathogens, gram-positives on the top and gram-negatives on the bottom. Enterococcal staphylococcus clostridium, I mentioned clostridium is deadly diarrhea. Then on the gram-negative side, that's Neobacitrus pseudomonas and bacteria. And these are the ones that centers for disease control point to that as particularly bad. They've added one additional one that's not on this, it's the gonorrhoeas. Cause of agent gonorrhea. Why is that on the list for this centers for disease control? Because we're running out of agents that we can use to treat patients in the clinic. You have to admit the patient to the hospital to treat gonorrhea. Thank you. Think of what that's going to do right. Rates of resistance have gone up. This is for the gram-positives, MRSA, vancomycin resistant enterobacterias, enterococcus, and for corn-resistant pseudomonas. And then the gram-negatives, I'm not going to point out each of the different ones, but look at the way these are going amongst these various resistance patterns. So the problem is we have resistant infections on the rise. 70% of hospital-acquired infections and caused by bacteria resistant to at least one major antibacterial class. Just as an example, carbapenem, which is still the very, very best last-ditch antibiotic that is not toxic related to listeners, is the last agent that most of us use for our sickest patients. This is the United States in 2000. Indian, which is a type of the first of the carbapenems. Indian resistance was very low. That's yellow. Just 9 years later. Look at what's happened. Look what's happened. Indian resistance massively down. And in Europe, this is carbapenem resistant pseudomonas. And particularly, look at Greece and look at Southeast Europe. Very, very, very scary. Very scary. So let me conclude with a few comments about Latin America. I work for a company, Merck, that does extensive analysis of drug resistance patterns globally. There's a big study in Latin America. And this was done for urinary tract infection in Latin America. Through this program, over 1,000 isolates of gram-negatives were obtained in emergency departments of 11 Latin American countries. E. coli, not surprisingly, is the most frequently isolated pathogen, followed by Klebsiella pneumoniae, Proteus virus, Pseudomonas, Enterobacteria, or all others. Frequency of presence of extended spectrum beta-lactamase, that's the ESBL I mentioned earlier. This makes the organism resistant to all of the beta-lactams except the newest carbapenems. That's a bad resistance pattern to have. The frequency ascended early on. Look, 2009, the ESBL was 9%, then it went up to 18%, 21%, 26%. Very, very scary. And Klebsiella, 0% in 2009, up to 40% in 2012. It's not very good. But these are very worrisome numbers. Some of the important antibiotics, ceftriaxone, is a third-generation cephalosporin susceptibility. You only have about 3/4 chance of being able to cure the Ebola with a third-generation cephalosporin. With the clone, that's been for years standard of care, at least in the United States, in the urinary infection. You have a 40% chance of failure with that, because only 60% are susceptible. And anti-ceftriaxone, which was standard of care 15 years ago, is essentially two-thirds of the organisms. It's not going to work. And for ergopenem, which is a carbapenem that doesn't go after pseudomonas, but is very active against E. coli and Klebsiella. Fortunately, for now at least, carbapenem is still showing susceptibility to issues together. So let me then focus on the SMART study that's focused in next study, because this is, of course, the audience I'm speaking to right now. So we have intra-abdominal infection that's IAI, and urinary tract infection, UTI, and that makes up a total of over 2,700 samples, including aggregates, as you see it's over the ground. 2/3 of them roughly from intra-abdominal, the other third are urinary tract. And I'll just show you the aggregates because there's not a lot of difference from the urinary tract to the intra-abdominal. But the predominant organism, not unexpectedly, is E. coli. The next Klebsiella, the next Pseudomonas. Notice that's here, although not as prominent as those, is number 4 on the list. That's the organism that I showed you just in the United States from the system to essentially everything. This is the ESBL rate of species. So if you have ESBL, you're going to have problems in treating. And notice that there are a lot of organisms that have ESBLs, a lot of these ESBLs. But fortunately, the carbapenems, vertipenem shown, and imipenem are 2 carbapenems. At least for E. coli, the organisms maintain susceptibility to these 2 and the other carbapenems as well. But notice how poorly the other antibiotics that we used to think of as standby antibiotics, those antibiotics are no longer nearly as effective. Somewhat more than somewhat worse. And if we look at Klebsiella, now you'll notice that vertipenem and imipenem are not 100% susceptible anymore. Notice there's a 2 to 3% resistance rate starting in imipenem with Klebsiella. So this is the beginning of what we call the next bad generation. ESBL is the first bad generation of resistance. It gets all the third generation of the SOS1s. The next generation is what we call CRE, carbapenem resistant antimicrobiano. We're starting now to see that in this. Very worse. There's a big problem with that in New York City, in the United States. And it's a big concern. And Pseudomonas is even worse. There are many strains of Pseudomonas that are essentially resistant to everything, as shown here. And even vertipenem is really not useful for Pseudomonas to do. Next one over, imipenem, 40% Pseudomonas are resistant to our very best antibiotics. And why does this matter? Because there have been many studies that show that if you have resistance to the antibiotic, whether it be a third generation cyclostone, whether it be imipenem, if it's an injury, multiple drug resistance, mortality rate goes up from 2-fold to 5-fold. 2-fold to 5-fold. Length of stay in the hospitals doubles as well. Much higher cost both to the patient survival and to the cost of society. So are we at the risk of entering post-antibiotic era? This is Margaret Shannon, Director General of the World Health Organization. Post-antibiotic era means, in fact, many modern medicines we know. Things as common as strep throat or a child's scratch knee would once again kill. My wife had an aunt who died when she was 2 years old in the pre-antibiotic era from pneumonia. My father, in 1990, almost died of diphtheria. We're thinking about potentially going back to the world. Some sophisticated interventions that we take for granted in medicine, hip replacements, organ transplants, anti-chemotherapy, there are preterm infants who will become far more difficult, even teenagers to undertake. Imagine if we did not any longer do chemotherapy because we were too afraid of reducing immunosuppression and the susceptibility of infection. So there's a global call to action. There are just some of the support investment in doing programs, and whether we hopefully see some more that come out. And I believe this week is World Health Organization Antibiotic Resistance Awareness Week. So there are a lot of other institutions going on. Let me just leave you with, again, a bridgehead comment. Infections can happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time. And use travel. Use travel. And because it's not a chronic condition, it's not specific to a specific body area, we don't have, we